just a few minutes. My name is Jessica Linder-Gallo, and I'm the President and CEO of the Aurora Regional Chamber of Commerce. It's my honor to welcome you today. The purpose of the Economic Pulse event has always been to bring you rich data and information that you need to drive decision-making in your business and in the upcoming year. It's no secret that 2020 was a unique phenomenon, to say the least, and more than ever, we're all seeking good information to help us move forward towards growth and economic recovery. We hope you'll find the information in today's event as interesting and as exciting as we do. And we know that there will be nuggets for each one of you to carry out of the room with you today. I'd like to start today's event off by giving a huge thank you to our sponsors who've helped to make this event possible. I know they can't hear you right now, but please give a loud clap anyways from your home. First off, I'd like to say thank you to our gold sponsors, Waubonsie Community College and Dolan and Murphy team. Thank you to our silver sponsors, eAlliance, Invest Aurora, and ServPro. And last but certainly not least, thank you to our bronze sponsors, Fox Valley Developers and Pilmer Real Estate. Thank you so much to all of you for your support of the Chamber. We're proud to have you as members and as sponsors with us. Without any further ado today, we have a great program and it is jam-packed, so let's get started. Joining me to kick off today's event is one of our gold sponsors, Waubonsie Community College. Please welcome Dr. Jamal Scott, Vice President of Strategy and Community Development. Jamal, welcome.
Welcome. Good morning. Yay. Thank you. Thank you for the applause. At Waubonsie Community College, we offer over 130 degrees and certificates. We're a 10,000 student, 4-campus network. Our 200+ acre main campus is located in Sugar Grove on Route 47. We have a 132,000 square foot campus on River Street in downtown Aurora. Our Aurora Fox Valley campus is on Route 34 in Aurora, adjacent to the Rush Copley Hospital, and that houses all of our healthcare programs. And our recently renovated Plano campus, which serves as our Innovation and Design Center, located on Route 34, that features our new welding and cybersecurity programs. We also have a robust offering of virtual courses highlighted by our synchronous online modality, where you can learn the same way we're having this dialogue here today. We invite you to come out and visit our campuses and learn more about the various programs and services that we have to offer. Our strategic plan has 3 pillars: student equity and success, community connections, and employee and organizational excellence. We understand the various challenges that our students and community are facing, particularly in these times, and we're focused on continuing to be an employer of choice and creating a transformative experience for everyone who comes in contact with Waubonsie. We're happy to be here today as the gold sponsor for this very important event and look forward to our continued work with the Aurora Regional Chamber of Commerce. Now, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Daniel Culbertson. Daniel Culbertson is an economist at the Indeed Hiring Lab, a global research institute committed to advancing the knowledge of HR professionals worldwide by using Indeed's unique data set to uncover the latest labor market trends. Daniel previously specialized in regional analysis and forecasting as an economist with Moody's Analytics and holds an MA in economics from the University of Delaware. Daniel is frequently invited to brief employers and the media on economic and labor trends, as well as offer commentary in the mainstream media. Daniel has been featured in monthly updates from Indeed Hiring Lab, as well as articles by Forbes and the Washington Post, among others. So how about another big round of applause for our keynote speaker today, Daniel Culbertson. Daniel.
Thank you for the applause, and thank you for that great introduction, Dr. Scott, and also thank you to the Aurora Chamber of Commerce for having me here today. And that was a great comprehensive introduction, so I won't belabor the point too much, but I'm an economist with Indeed, and I'm not here to sell anyone on Indeed, so I've long since forgotten all the statistics about our coverage, but Indeed is a global job search site. We're in over 60 countries, millions and millions of unique visitors every month. So what that does is gives us a great data set for our economist team on the hiring lab to play around with and see what insights we can tease out about the data. So today what I wanted to do is go through what I call our standard US labor market outlook deck. And the goal of this deck is to give some context into what has been going on with the economy and specifically the labor market over the past year and give some sense of where we are in the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis, and also give a sense of the economists' expectations of how we're thinking about this and what we expect in the coming year with the recovery. And I'll also, inside of this deck, have some insights into Indeed's data to show off what we are seeing in that unique data set that we have access to. So without further ado, let me make sure I have control of the slides here. That looks like I do. Okay, so we're all seeing the slide deck, I'm assuming. So just to set the table here, this is a slide that I've been showing since the start of the COVID-19 crisis. And this, in a sense, is just to get the point across that the economic recovery is very closely tied to COVID-19. And we are not going to have a full recovery until we get past COVID-19. And what's here on this slide is sort of a list of the largest factors that tie COVID-19 to the economy. And this list has changed in importance throughout this crisis, but perhaps the two largest factors right now tied to financial, whether or not we are going to get more stimulus. It looks as though we are. And the question of whether or not that stimulus is going to be enough to get the economy moving again. And the second most important factor here is all tied to behavior. Until we get businesses and consumers and workers comfortable enough to go about living their previous economic lives that we all had before the COVID-19 crisis, then we are not going to get a full, robust recovery. So getting to the other side of COVID-19 as far as a health crisis standpoint is very critical for the development and the completion of the recovery from COVID-19. And so moving on to the next slide with the economists' expectations, I always like to throw out a couple caveats here. And the first one being that we at the Indeed Hiring Lab do not do any of our own forecasts. And I also like to throw out the other caveat that economists don't necessarily have the best track record when it comes to predicting what's going to happen in the economy. We often get things wrong, but we're as good at it as anybody else. So even in the best of times, when things are a bit more normal, if you want to use that phrase, the economist forecast should always be taken with a bit of a grain of salt. And so economists are thinking about this recovery, and the general economist consensus is that we are going to have a rather slow recovery from COVID-19. And there are several reasons for that. Obviously, the vaccine rollout that has begun has been very good news for the economy. And if we continue to have success with the vaccine rollout, then we very likely could alter those economists' predictions of a slow recovery, and that could help things pick up a little bit. One important note on the impact of vaccines, the vaccine rollout and getting people vaccinated and getting people comfortable enough to, again, go out and resume their normal economic lives can help get that economic engine moving again. It can get people out, it can get people spending. But what the vaccines can't do is it cannot reopen businesses that permanently closed during COVID-19. The vaccine cannot replace lost income, months or sometimes in some cases a year, almost a year of lost income from people who have been on unemployment. So there is lasting permanent economic damage that was caused by COVID-19 that the vaccine can't solve. And that is lasting economic damage that is going to take time to recover from, and that is going to exert weight on economic growth throughout the recovery. One last thing to keep in mind as we move through the recovery is that this recovery is very likely to be rather uneven. All economic recoveries and recessions, for that matter, are very uneven across geography, across industry, and across demographics. And this is going to be true for this recovery as well, especially a situation like COVID-19 that was so precise, if you want to use that word, in how it impacted certain pockets of the economy greatly and other pockets of the economy almost not at all. So getting a sense of where we are so far in the recovery, it's helpful to look at some of the data that is available publicly and comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this chart here is just showing the month-to-month change in total employment. So just the number of people working on payrolls. And this is a number that often appears in the news at the beginning of the month when the Bureau of Labor Statistics release its what's called colloquially known as the jobs report. This is just the number of jobs that were lost or added in the economy over the past month. And so here in the middle of the chart, you can see the impact of COVID-19, where we lost 20 million jobs in 1 month. And you can see the bounce back when we began to add jobs, sometimes in the millions per month, right at the start of the recovery. But what you can also see here on the far right side of the chart is that labor market growth has slowed and actually taken a step back at some points in recent months. And this was somewhat expected as we moved into the winter. Everything went sort of back inside, which is problematic for COVID-19. So things began to sort of very expectedly slow down again. And we saw that in hiring as well. In January, the US economy only added 49,000 jobs to total payrolls. And when you compare, the size of these bars, in recent months to what we've lost since COVID-19 started, you can see that we have a bit of a ways to go to make up that lost ground. And this is something that we hope picks up rather soon. Perhaps the other largest measure of labor market performance that people turn to, especially at times like these, is the unemployment rate. This chart here shows, with this pink purplish line, shows the overall headline unemployment rate. This is the main measure of unemployment that is used to take stock of how the economy is doing. And we also have here the core unemployment rate. So the headline unemployment rate, this is the one that made news at the start of COVID-19. It shot up to 14.7%, which is incredibly high. It has consistently come down since the COVID-19 crisis, and even notched down again in January of this year to 6.4%. This core unemployment rate is essentially the same as that headline unemployment rate, but what it does is it factors out, the main difference is that it factors out people that consider themselves to be temporarily unemployed. So what this core unemployment rate does is give us a more sustained look at unemployment. And at a time like now, and with the COVID-19 crisis, when so many people considered themselves to be temporarily unemployed because of the nature of this crisis, this is a different measure of unemployment that, again, gives us a look at more sustained unemployment. As you can see, it didn't rise nearly as much. It stayed elevated for a bit longer, but it has started to come down over the past month, which is not necessarily a trend yet, but we hope this continues and becomes a trend, because this is a measure of unemployment that, again, is a bit more sustained and is a bit more indicative of the long-term health of the economy. So when I'm speaking with employers on behalf of Indeed, and I'm talking to our clients, one of the questions that I consistently get from employers is that if unemployment rate is so high, if there are so many people out there looking for work, how come I'm not getting all the applicants that I would anticipate? How come we don't have people knocking down our doors looking to work for us? And there's a couple factors at play here. The first is and you can break these into two useful buckets of reasons why unemployed workers might not be searching and reasons why employed workers might not be searching. So first of all, for the unemployed, with COVID-19 and the amount of school closures that we saw over the past year, family and caregiving responsibilities have changed for a lot of workers, and that's caused people to stay home. This is something that you can see in the public data. If you look at Bureau of Labor Statistics data on labor force participation rates, especially amongst women who are prime working age, who typically bear a bit more of the childbearing responsibilities here in the United States, you see decreased levels of labor force participation. So that is one reason why people are staying home. Also, people are just generally cautious of the pandemic, especially in roles that may expose workers to the virus or may put them at higher risk. People are very cautious, and workers are very cautious about that. And then lastly, I mentioned how many people consider themselves to be temporarily unemployed. This is a bit of less of a factor as we're so far into this crisis, but there are workers out there who are anticipating going back to their previous role, and they may be holding out for that. Employed workers, in times of economic turmoil, people tend to stay put. So employed workers are much less likely to take the risk of moving to a different role at a time like this. We see this with what we call the quits rate that's measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, just how often people are quitting their job to move to something new. That is something that typically nosedives during economic turmoil as workers are cautious and they don't want to be the last person or the most recent person to join a company at times like this, because that can put them in a precarious position sometimes. So moving on to Indeed's data and what we've been tracking since the COVID-19 crisis. One of the things that we've been tracking most closely and talking about very publicly is our jobs postings data. As a job postings aggregator, Indeed is a job search site. Job seekers can come to our site, search for jobs all over the world. So we are a job postings aggregator. How Indeed gets these jobs is we go across the internet and scrape the internet for anything that looks like a job posting. So anything that looks like a job posting ends up on our site. And so this is not a measure of the number of employers that are spending money with Indeed. It's not taking stock of our clients. This is a measure of the online labor market at large here in the United States. And so the way that we've been showing this jobs posting data is we are making a comparison to where things were before the crisis. So we're showing the percent change since February 1st of 2020. And so looking at this chart, you can see the general and probably expected trend in our job postings that you would expect during a crisis like COVID-19. So mid-March, job postings on our site began to fall drastically, which is expected. During times of economic turmoil, one of the first things employers do is pull back on hiring. So job postings on our site began to fall drastically. They continued to fall until about the beginning of May, when they were near 40% down near 40% from where they were February 1st. The beginning of May was a turning point. We began to see employers jumping back. Well, jumping is not the right term. We began to see employers easing back into the labor market, and job postings on our site steadily but more or less consistently have continued to rise since then. And as of February 19th, so this is relatively recent data, we are about 5% ahead of where we were before the COVID-19 crisis started as it pertains to job postings on our site. And so this is great news. This is a sign that employers are getting back into the labor market and that our recovery has progressed. But it's important to keep in mind that this is just jobs postings data from the previous data that I showed from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that showed the unemployment rate, that showed total employment. We still are in quite a hole and we have a long way to go. But this job postings data is promising because this shows that employers are getting back into the labor market. If we dive a little bit deeper into this job postings data, we can see what this looks like across industry or sector rather. And so this table is showing something very similar, just segmented out by industry. So focusing in on this middle column here on this table, again, what we're showing here is the percent change since February 1st, 2020, so before the crisis. And here at the bottom of the table, we have the industries that have been most impacted by COVID-19. These are largely industries that you would expect. For example, hospitality and tourism is still down 35% from where it was before the crisis as it pertains to job postings on our site. And this is one of those sectors, hospitality and tourism. This requires people getting out of the house, traveling, a lot of face-to-face contact. This is, one of those service industries that's not going to see a full recovery until we get, very likely not going to see a full recovery until we get well onto the other side of COVID-19. Also industries like arts and entertainment, food prep, beauty and wellness. These are some of the ones that are lagging the overall labor market. Here in the middle of the table, we have the industries that are performing more or less along the overall labor market average. So things like retail, sales, banking and finance, software development, a lot of things that are more corporate roles in some senses. And then it's important to keep in mind that retail is a very broad category. There are certain pockets of retail that have done consistently well throughout all this. Think grocery stores, home improvement, large scale appliances, things like that. And there are other pockets of retail that are just have not seen the same recovery. And here at the top of the table, we have some of the sectors that have been performing well. Things like loading and stocking, driving, anything related to moving goods around as people have been home more, online shopping has increased. And by and large, consumers have shifted their spending from services because because a lot of that is shut down, to goods. So anything related to goods, moving goods around and production of goods has been doing rather well on our site. So the main takeaway here is that, as has been true throughout COVID-19, there are still very broad and very rather varied impacts across the labor market, especially across sector when it comes to the impact of COVID-19. We've also been looking at our data, and we can see different impacts when we look at the job postings data on our site across the labor market, especially when it comes to looking at occupations by wage tier. So this is a bit of a different measure, and this is less recent data. This ends at December 31st, 2020, but the trend is still pertinent and still the same today. What has recovered more quickly in the labor market is lower skilled roles. I'm sorry, I should say lower paying roles. So this chart looks at the jobs posting data by wage tier. Those jobs that are in the top third or the middle third, those higher paying roles have not recovered as strongly, whereas roles that are at the bottom end of that wage tier have recovered quite quickly. And again, this is something that is subject to the impact of COVID-19 and how the large impact of, the devastation of COVID-19 fell on certain areas of the labor market that had a high concentration in lower skilled or lower paying roles. And they have begun to bounce back more quickly as we reopen the economy. Also, we can see differences in our job postings data across geography. I'm going to pick things up a little bit here because I'm getting toward the end of the time here. But when we look at our job postings data across geography, the large takeaway that we see is that larger, more dense, more populated metro areas faced a bigger impact from COVID-19 and have rebounded much more slowly. Smaller, more suburban, more rural metro areas in some cases didn't face the same impacts of COVID-19. They still saw large declines, but they weren't nearly as large, and they have bounced back much more quickly. And this is something that you can see in this list here. This is the 10 metro areas that are facing the largest impacts of COVID-19, where their job postings are still down the furthest. And you can see a lot of the metro areas here are larger, more populated, more dense metro areas. So again, all recessions are very uneven in their impact, as are their recoveries. And this is something that, again, we can see in Indeed's job posting data. So as we look toward the future, and we all hope to get to the other side of COVID-19 as quickly as possible, one of the questions I often get is, well, how will we know that we're still on the track to recovery? Aside from looking at that employment data and looking at unemployment rates, what are some of the more broad signs of recovery? And in the short term, one of the indicators that we are on the path to a strong recovery is a rebound in those affected service industries that took the brunt of COVID-19. Once you see restaurants coming back online, certain pockets of retail that require a lot of face-to-face contact and people getting out of their homes and going to stores. Once you see those industries bouncing back and you see hiring in those industries, that's a sign of the short-term recovery. Also, I mentioned how consumers shifted their spending away from services and over to goods. Once you see that shift back to services, that is another sign of the short-term recovery. Longer term, earlier in the presentation, I showed that core unemployment rate. Once you see a sustained drop in overall unemployment, in particular that core unemployment rate, that is a sign of much more longer-term labor market health and a sign that we are on the right track for the long term. And then also, once you see a rebound in higher paying roles and more roles that lend themselves better to working from home, these are industries that have lagged a bit in the recovery so far. Once you see the hiring in those sectors and in those types of roles, that is also a sign of the longer term recovery. And then lastly, once you turn on the TV and you see, a sporting event with a crowd full of people in the stands, that is a sign that people are getting comfortable enough to go out and really resume their economic lives. And that is another telltale sign of the longer term economic recovery. One last trend I want to touch on before I get to some of the advice for recruiting in today's labor market and wrap things up here. Another thing that we've been tracking in our data is remote work. It is very difficult to say. We've obviously all been going through this forced work from home experiment over the past year for sometimes positive and sometimes negative results. It is very difficult to say how sticky or how long-standing this trend toward remote work will be once we get to the other side of COVID-19. That's very difficult to predict. I think it's going to be very different across industries. It's going to be very different across business to business, and it's also going to be very different worker to worker. It's not going to be for everybody, right? So it's very difficult to say the long-standing impact of the world of remote work, but it is safe to say that it's going to be somewhat more prevalent than it was before COVID-19. And so one measure that we've been tracking is remote job postings on our site. And so this is either job postings that mention remote or work from home in the job posting, or job postings that have remote tagged as their location. And here, this chart is showing the share of job postings that feature remote work as a share of all jobs. And this is as a share of all jobs on our site. And so as you might expect, early in 2020, COVID-19 becomes a problem. You can see a very sharp uptick in the number of remote job postings on our site. And as you can see from the rest of the right side of this chart, this is a trend that has continued, and even going through February 1st, so this is relatively recent data, that trend in remote job postings on our site is still on the up and up. So employers are still looking to bring people on remotely. And then when you look at the other side of this equation, when you look at job seeker interest for remote work, the trend isn't as strong recently, but the large takeaway remains the same. So this is looking at searches that have any keyword related to remote work, work from home, telework, anything like that, as a share of all job searches on our site. And so again, right there toward the middle of the chart, you can see a surge in interest in remote work around the start of COVID-19. It died down a little bit in the late spring and summer last year. But again, it continued to slowly rise. And again, through the beginning of February, that trend in job seeker interest in remote work is still just as high as it was at the peak of the COVID-19. And also it is elevated well above where it was before COVID-19. So job seekers are still increasingly keen on working remotely as well. But like I said, it's very difficult to predict how far this trend will extend into the future. One last piece I want to leave you with is some admittedly very broad advice for recruiting in today's labor market. This is advice that may not work for everybody. I know everyone's recruiting situation and hiring situation and their needs are all very different. But this is some of the food for thought, if you will, that I have been leaving employers with throughout the COVID-19 crisis. And the first piece is to focus on skills. In a time like this, when there are many people out there looking for work, and we've seen just a massive amount of change in the labor market over the past year, that tight labor market that we had after 10 years of steadily improving labor market in 2019, that tight labor market is gone. Situation is radically different. And in a time like now, you may see a lot of overqualified candidates applying for your roles, and it can be very tempting to hire someone who may have much more education or much more experience for a role than you typically require. I would caution against that, just because those workers may not always be a great fit for those roles. And then also, once things begin to improve, those are the workers who are going to be most likely to leave and go find something that is a better fit for them and does better fit their qualifications. And that's going to leave you just recruiting for that role again. Also, I've been cautioning employers to get used to seeing long spells of unemployment on people's resume. With as much turmoil as we've seen in the labor market, you are going to see longer terms of unemployment more frequently on people's resumes. And this is something that recruiters are just going to have to get used to. I know after 10 years of improving labor market, recruiters could have their choice of people who had no holes on their resume, but this is something that's going to be more common. I've touched on this briefly. Employed workers are going to be much more likely to stay put in a labor market like this one, where there is a lot of uncertainty. It may be harder to recruit workers who are currently employed, just out of their caution for moving to a new company at a time like this. And then also, I've mentioned this several times, but this is going to be a very uneven recovery. There are going to be pockets of the labor market, certain sectors that recover much more slowly than others, in particular leisure and hospitality, anything related to tourism, certain pockets of retail. And this is going to leave employers with opportunity to go and look at these workers and see if they have skills that are transferable to your industry and to your roles. And these are going to be pockets of opportunity that are going to exist for a bit as the recovery moves at different speeds in different sectors and in different areas of the country as well. So I know I just threw a lot of information at you all in a very short period of time, but hopefully this is useful in sort of setting the context for not only of the rest of the event today, but also for how economists and how everyone is thinking about the labor market. Also, many of the trends that were related to Indeed's data that I showed in this deck are updated on our blog site at hiringlab.org. And this is also a free resource of information for anyone who's interested in labor market insights. All of the research that our economists here in the United States do and in other markets across the globe lives on our blog at hiringlab.org. And that's, again, a free resource for anyone. So I encourage you all to check that out. So thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I'll turn things back over to Jessica to see if anyone has any questions.
Wonderful. Daniel, thank you so much for that information. I know I got several chats while you were talking. There's so much good information there, so we really appreciate you being here and sharing that with us. I will also say you are on top of the questions today. So I'm going to go ahead and read a few questions that have come in that we've had. Some of them you've really kind of covered. So I'll just give you a chance if you want to add anything to that. And to everyone else right now, all of you who are watching, feel free to definitely click on that little Q&A button down on the bottom toolbar and use that, and we'll continue to pull from there. So one thing you talked about, and really you covered this pretty well, but as you were talking about the impact of vaccines early on in your presentation there, you're talking about how it likely won't fix all of the impacts we've seen. And I think so many people are looking for the light at the end of that tunnel. So it was great kind of hearing you talk about signs to watch for. Anything else that you would say in terms of things to watch for in recovery, maybe as it relates to vaccines? There's so much attention on that right now.
Sorry, honestly, I don't know if there's really anything I would add there, because it's really, this is sort of a cop-out, but this is something that's so new. It's very hard to put something like this that is a very acute medical crisis into the context of the economy more than I already have. This is such a new experience for all of us, and then especially for economists. This is, every recession is different in its own really unique way. But this one is especially different. We've never had anything like this before. So, the amount that vaccines will get things rolling again and get things comfortable and get people out there moving again, economically, how quickly that happens and to what extent that happens is very, very much an open-ended question right now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I wish I had a better answer, but it's really tough to say.
No, I think that's totally fair. And you gave some really great kind of labor indicators to look at as well. So absolutely things to watch for. One of the other questions we had come in while you were talking was kind of the $1 million question that I know we keep hearing at the Chamber, which is about remote work. So I love seeing that data about really kind of what job seekers are looking for. I think there's so much impact there for employers as they think about how big should our office be? What do we want it to look like physically? What adaptations might we make to our team? So really great information that you shared in that section. So one of the questions then, we'll jump to one that you haven't covered. It's like I said, you were really on top of them. But you talked about some reasons that some people might not want to come back to work. And those range significantly from life experience to health to many different things. But one person was wondering, when we're thinking about bringing people back, is there, certainly on the mind of employers, do you think convincing reluctant workers to come back is really key to recovery, or is there such a pool of folks out there that we can kind of look beyond if people really aren't interested in that?
So we at Indeed, we have a team of what we call our product evangelists that spend a lot of time speaking with employers and giving them advice about anything and everything, really. And then COVID-19, remote work, things like remote work and getting people back to work has been first and foremost. And one of the things I've heard our evangelists, I don't often give this kind of advice isn't really my specialty as an economist, but one of the things that I've very often heard evangelists tell employers is to be very open, very upfront, and very direct with the things that you have been doing to make people comfortable getting back to work, whether that's testing certain safety protocols, giving people more flexibility so they can tend to their home, to their home needs, and giving people more flexibility with sick leaves and things like that. Whatever it is, be very upfront, be very open, even put that in your job description, not in the job title, but in the job description and things like that, just to get that out, because you're competing with, those workers who are willing to work or could be persuaded to work. You're competing with any and all employers, just as you always are. And if other employers are doing this, then that's something you're setting yourself behind. So that's the piece of advice I've heard very frequently. Just to be very forward with all that, because the virus is top of mind for a lot of people. In the second half of your question, as far as groups to look toward, groups that might be those beyond, those are hesitant about the labor market. That's a bit of a tougher question, just because people are hesitant to work for many different reasons, whether it's the virus itself, whether it's their obligations at home, whether they're waiting for a different job, or the opportunities just aren't there in their industry and they're not looking to move to a different industry. The reasons that people have been sitting out on the sidelines of the labor force are varied and very broad. So it's difficult to point to one particular group. It's just, the good news is that these are factors, whether it's the virus, home needs, and waiting for their industry to come back. These are factors that will sort of ameliorate or heal themselves as we get further into the COVID-19 recovery. So these are all things that hopefully become less of an issue as we get further into closer to the other end of COVID-19.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And a couple of other questions we've gotten you answered in there too. So kind of combining a few things. And I love what you said as you were talking about kind of that advice for looking at other industries. We've heard a lot about disproportionate impacts of this crisis that there have been. And I think it's an opportunity for employers really to think about how they can maybe open up opportunity to folks they haven't considered before. So some really great advice you packed in there. All right, I'm going to finish with one last question here, and it's every economist's least favorite question, so I apologize in advance, but everyone always wants to hear it. So if you could get out your crystal ball, which we know none of us really have, what's your gut, and when we'll see or start to see, or when you hope to see some sizable growth in the economy?
This is really something I'm not allowed to do since our business is so closely tied to the labor market for legality concerns. So again, sort of what I always do is sort of a cop-out, is point to other economic expectations and give a very broad, circuitous to answer this. But I'll say this: I, much like many other people and like many economists, are very hopeful that we will see this year, as things to come back online and as that vaccine rollout continues. One thing that economists and a lot of people are hoping for is a bit of a release of pent-up demand. So, all the spending that people haven't been able to do on services, all the trips, all the restaurants, all the concerts, all the day camps they send their kids away to that they haven't been able to do. What we're hoping for is for a large appetite for that to be sort of unleashed at once. And that is something I think you see in economists' predictions for rather strong economic growth at the end of this year. And put that in the context, though, that's sort of the snapback from what was a very big drop, right? So even if we see very strong economic growth toward the end of this year, when things start to come back online, which is a possibility and what everyone's hoping for, we're still digging ourselves out from what was a tremendous hole that was even bigger than what we saw during the Great Recession. So, yeah, we're hoping for better things this year. I'll say that.
Absolutely. Daniel, thank you so much. We really appreciate all of your information and your remarks. It's really been an honor to have you with us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite.
So next up, I'm so excited to be able to welcome our second gold sponsor, Dolan and Murphy. So joining me here in just a second is Brian Dolan, commercial broker, to tell you a little bit more about Dolan and Murphy and even a little bit about what's been going on in their business, some exciting things. Brian, welcome to our webinar here. Are you able to hear me? I think he's still muted, so 1 second here. All right, well, I will go ahead. Hopefully we can get him unmuted. So I will tell you guys a little bit about Dolan and Murphy as an introduction. Dolan and Murphy is been part of the Aurora community for over 50 years. The Dolan and Murphy team brings a depth and breadth of experience to their new position with the commercial real estate platform of Caton Commercial. The brokers of this dynamic team handle a wide range of commercial and real estate transactions. They specialize in industrial, land sales, development, and investment sales. Whatever your commercial and industrial needs, the Dolan and Murphy team of Caton and Commercial Real Estate can certainly help. So with that little bit of an overview, let's see if I can get Brian one more time. All right, I don't think it's working. So we want to say a huge thank you to Dolan and Murphy for sponsoring today's event. It is wonderful to have you all here with us, and hopefully we'll be able to bring him in later in the broadcast. For now, we're going to go ahead and shift to our panel discussion for today's program. We have an excellent panel to share with you today. Moderating our panel is Dr. Jamal Scott, Vice President of Strategy and Community Development for Waubonsie Community College. You heard from him a little bit earlier wearing his gold sponsor hat today, but now I'm excited to welcome him back as our moderator. Dr. Scott has been in his role for the last 6 years and leads Waubonsie's Workforce and Solutions Council, among other roles at the college. He is also recently named to the Morton Arboretum Board of Trustees and is the treasurer for the Aurora Regional Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, which we are very honored to have him. Dr. Scott, welcome back.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning again to everyone. I'm going to start by introducing our panel before we run through some questions and answers for all of you. The first member of our panel is Brian Gay from Invest Aurora. Brian is the CEO of Invest Aurora, Aurora's public-private partnership dedicated to economic development. Brian previously has worked for the Illinois Department of Commerce and Shoes DuPage. Brian gives a unique perspective of the economic situation of Aurora and future development projects. So big welcome to Brian. Our second panelist, Dr. Caleb Lewis from Aurora University.
Right.
Dr. Lewis is an assistant professor of economics and finance at Aurora University. He earned a PhD from Northern Illinois University and teaches courses in corporate finance, personal finance, and economics. Dr. Lewis brings an academic perspective to understanding the local economic situation in Aurora. So a big welcome to Dr. Lewis. And then our last panelist, Dr. Orphe Divungi from the Illinois Policy Institute. Dr. Orphe Divungi is the chief economist at the Illinois Policy Institute in Chicago. Dr. Divungi's work has been published in CNN Business, USA Today, The Washington Examiner, The Chicago Tribune, Crain's Chicago Business, The Wall Street Journal, and Newsday. Dr. Divungi brings a unique perspective on policy and research which affects the economic health of Illinois. So a big welcome to Dr. Divungi. All right, well, let's get started. Jump right in with some questions. We heard from Daniel. He talked a little bit about the slow recovery, lost income, unemployment. So we think about some of the multiple business experiences that Daniel described playing out here. What does that look like for us locally? Let's start with Dr. Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Scott. Yeah, I think that a lot of the trends that Mr. Culbertson described, we can expect to see here. So we have we are one of those smaller urban centers, right? And so as we look at changes in workplace environments, I noted in a study by Invest Aurora and the Chamber that something like 50% of businesses are going to reduce meeting sizes, that we are going to see decreased, some amount of decreased meetings and things face to face. Those kinds of things are going to reduce the amount of traffic we see downtown, right? And so we can expect some secondary businesses, gas stations, restaurants, and those kinds of things to see some decrease in demand there as well. And those kinds of shifts are going to be an important part of how the recovery plays out in our area.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Brian, let's go to you.
Yeah, again, I would definitely say ditto on Caleb's analysis there. We are seeing throughout the pandemic, we've been seeing interest in businesses either starting up or relocating to Aurora. Many of those being those gig type workers, those individuals being attracted to Aurora. One, because while we are still considered a suburb of the city of Chicago, we are our own unique urban atmosphere. Where can you find the number of amenities, the types of businesses, places to shop, places to dine, eat and play, all kind of in one area, and you're 60 minutes, from on an express train to the city of Chicago. You have access to 2 international airports and everywhere in between. So we are strategically located within the United States that you can pretty much get anywhere when needed, but also, kind of have that laid back urban feel to it as well.
I agree. Lots to do in Aurora.
Absolutely.
Dr. Dibongui.
Yeah, I generally agree with the panel that in the short term, we'll have a very slow recovery. It's often workers that were low-paying jobs and low-paying jobs that are not able to work remotely, that were affected by COVID-19. Those workers also take a longer time to find stable employment. But I'm a little bit more optimistic in the longer term. Because we've all heard of the massive, colossal stimulus package that President Biden is going to send to Americans, and the Fed confirmed only yesterday that they are going to keep us in a very low rate environment. And so when you add the stimulus package that will be nearly 5 times the size of the economic haul to fears of COVID-19 subsiding, and pent-up demand, with Americans having close to $2 trillion in excess savings, I think we're going to see some robust growth in the near future, in the longer term, maybe 2022, 2023. But again, we don't have a crystal ball, but I'm optimistic given the size of the stimulus that we're going to get out of this.
Thank you, Dr. Dibongui. That's an excellent perspective. So let's stay with you, Dr. Dibongui. When you think about the last year and how the economy has been affected, you just mentioned the stimulus package, some other things. What are some other positive things that you think have happened in the last year? Maybe some negative things, and then maybe in your statewide perspective, have you seen anything unique to the Aurora region or even nationally that we can take away from the economic situation the last year?
Yeah, I mean, again, I said that we're going to see some growth nationwide, but I'm less optimistic about the state of Illinois. And the reason, the state is going to continue to lag other states. And the reason I say that is because we have a highly unequal state, and the state is not necessarily going to use these unrestricted funds that are going to be transferred by the federal government to spend on public investment, new public sector investments and services that Illinoisans need and rely on, because we have this massive pension cost, problem, right? So rising pension costs in Illinois are basically taking money away from citizens' pockets, and so that problem is huge. I think it's it's kind of sad, so I'm not very optimistic from that perspective. I can't explain how pension spending has increased 500% over the last 20 years, but child protection services, mental health, state police, college aid has been falling. It's hard to explain why most municipalities are seeing more than 90% of their property tax collections go to pensions instead of the current delivery of public services. It's hard to justify how we had a 32% tax increase in 2011, and yet the state eliminated general assistance to the needy that same year. So I'm optimistic about the recovery nationwide, but I think Illinois is going to continue to lag because we haven't fixed our broken pension system.
Excellent point. We saw about a big pension payout this morning in the news, that's covering the media this morning. Brian, let's go to you and taking it back to the Aurora economic level. What are some things you've seen over the last year? Anything unique to Aurora that you think is maybe good or that we should be even more concerned about in the local Aurora region?
Well, I think, just to kind of point out, just again, I think Aurora is following some of those national trends that Daniel had talked about. So, we saw that big spike of unemployment last year in March and April, where I think, locally we spiked to about 15.6%. And then, as recently, I think the data that we have for November or December, we're down to about 6%. So, that's, significantly higher than where we were at this time last year, at about 3.10% unemployment. But again, we see that trend, going along with the national and doing that. So hopefully we stay on this track, as we begin to open up more, see more businesses, open and get back to whatever this new normal is. So we are seeing that as a good sign for the things ahead. The other part is, again, while Dr. Urfe's point about Illinois still having its troubles, I used to I make the joke, the good news is that you're talking about Aurora, Illinois, or you're talking about Aurora. The bad news is that you're talking about Aurora, Illinois. And, we take the good with the bad, and that, there's still a significant interest in locating businesses to the state of Illinois, but we have our problems. And that, just puts us at somewhat of a disadvantage, when we're competing against Wisconsin, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, and some of these other states, within the Midwest. It just makes our job a little bit more difficult. But like I said, our strategic advantages of being located just outside of the city of Chicago, we are really, while again, we're kind of our unique, our own unique city, we're still part of a global economy, just being that well connected to it. And like I said, in the past 6 months, we've had a number of businesses seriously take a look at expanding in Aurora. We've attracted over 1,000 new jobs here over the past year. And, more importantly, we've taken steps to retain and keep about 1,000 employees that were that were at risk of leaving the city here. So, we're looking at this in all different directions, all different ways to make sure that, as the national trend, continues to go, towards recovery, that Aurora is there, doing the same thing and hopefully better on the other end.
Well said. Thank you, Brian. Dr. Lewis.
Yeah, I think that, I think I'd like to echo what Dr. DeVungi said about Illinois and our status there, but I'd like to say I've seen some laudable efforts at the local level, right? We've seen Aurora do things like offer tax holidays for some businesses and liquor license fees and, 2 different, at least, recovery packages. I think those are great efforts. And I think, again, because of the things we can observe about our state, the local level is going to be an important place for some action there. We do have significant pent-up demand. We have a lot of savings, which is not usually true about the United States, and we have really, really low interest rates. This could be a phenomenal opportunity for business creation and small businesses to open up, which is going to be really important for the structure of our economy. As we go forward, the large corporations and the larger businesses have had an easier time going remote or having delivery infrastructure pivoting, and our smaller businesses have really struggled. And I think that what we can do at the federal, at the state, and at the local level to support those businesses is going to be really important for the recovery going forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, let's stay with you. So you covered kind of how things went the last year, a little bit about the current situation. When you think about the future of the Aurora economy and about this region, what are some areas of future growth, future challenges you think we'll continue to see out of this pandemic-stricken economy? What are some things Daniel talked about as a sports enthusiast? I share in the desire to get the stadiums packed again, but what do you think the economy is going to look like a year from now? Let's fast forward to February 2022. What do you think things are going to look like, and what should we be looking forward to?
I'm going to echo Mr. Culbertson and say that I hesitate to make predictions, especially about the future. I think that we should be a little careful there. But I will say, in a year, we can expect some of the disparate features of the recovery we're seeing now continue to play out if we're not careful, right? So we hear a lot about the K-shaped recovery, but the reality is that a lot of this is being pooled into communities of color and underserved communities. And if we don't do things to be conscientious about that, then we're going to have persistent problems with those issues. And I would like to see some more concerted effort. I like that this conversation is very focused on root cause. How has shutdowns affected the labor market? I'm also very interested in outcomes and how they're pooling in certain communities. And I'd really like to see some efforts. And I think, again, Dr. DeVungi made some really great points about the assistance we need at the state level. And I'd really like to see some of those kinds of things kick up. Again, focusing on root cause is really important, but if we don't focus on kind of the pooling of outcomes in some communities, then we're going to create problems for ourselves.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. DeVungi, what do you think? You have a unique perspective given your role. I mean, you think about areas of future growth. I know, as Jessica said, it's dangerous to ask economists to predict the future, but looking ahead, if we look to February 2022, what things are you concerned about that you think we'll continue to struggle with? What are some things we can look forward to? I mean, what's your thought on kind of the statewide perspective?
Yeah, so I have to agree with Dr. Lewis that, when you look at the numbers, COVID disproportionately affected Blacks and Hispanics, especially Black families, actually, in Illinois, women with young children, so the poorest. And, it pushed them out of the labor force. We saw the fact that the lack of daycare alternatives actually pushed many women out of the labor force. And we're going to need these women to come back into the labor force to help us grow this economy. Now, again, in terms of, I can't make huge, I'm not going to make predictions. I don't have a crystal ball, but I have some thoughts about what Biden is doing right now. President Biden has a stimulus package he wants to send to Americans. And my problem with the stimulus package is that it's so poorly targeted. The majority of Americans have seen their incomes increase during the pandemic, not decrease. And so sending checks, blank checks to everybody, to blanket checks to every American will only contribute to rising income inequality. Instead, the president should be focused on those who lost their jobs, on businesses that have actually gone under, that have gone belly up because of the pandemic. And the stimulus should be targeted. Sending these checks out to everybody will, maybe increase even the risk of overstimulating the economy once COVID fears subside. And, we're so already in the market, where bond yields are rising. If the cost of borrowing increases too much, right, those families are going to be negatively affected. And even those states that are highly indebted, like the state of Illinois, is going to be negatively affected by higher borrowing costs. So I think the stimulus needs to be better targeted. It should be focused on those who suffered the most, which are basically low-income families and minorities. And so if we do that and try to get those people back to work, help them close the gap a little bit, we're going to be in better shape. Now, of course, more needs to be done at the state level, right? So that means pension reform. We got to reform our broken pension system, because if we don't do that, pension costs are going to continue to swallow up all of the dollars coming from the federal government instead of going to people who actually need them.
Thank you, Dr. DeVungi. That's an excellent point. That's something we focus on a lot at Waubonsie Community College. You speak of this equity versus equality debate, the whole notion of helping those who need it the most. versus kind of the blanket approach to equality. So I think that's a great point that's well taken. Brian, I'll turn to you about the future of the economy. We did have a question come in. Someone was asking, and I don't know if you'd be the best person to answer this, but given your Aurora focus, will Aurora as a suburb of Chicago get a piece of the stimulus package, and how does that work in terms of the distribution of funds for the city of Aurora? I'm not sure if you have any perspective on that.
You know, it all regarding the stimulus and the city. So it really all depends on what the final package looks like. I know during the last during the last package or the last two packages, the city has found some relief. That's why today we're in, while the city is in, a better position than originally expected. People, that's at the same time too that, we continue to see our residents and our neighbors, continue to spend money in the city of Aurora. So those are all good things. But I wouldn't know where to expect to see, some of these things. I mean, the state of Illinois, I think in the last package received something like around $8 billion. In total, I think all that trickles down, based on size of municipality and a few other things. So I would say, based on the fact that we're the second largest community in the state of Illinois and that we have access to additional programs, we should see, more than our fair share of that moving forward to help us, navigate this new reality here going forward. But I'd say, in terms of what we should expect to hear, at least in my opinion, over the next 12 months as we move through recovery, into next year, is I do agree with both Dr. Lewis and Dr. Divongi, is that there's just a wealth of pent-up demand out there in the marketplace. I know, talking with my 67-year-old father, he can't wait to go out and go eating at restaurants again. My parents, just like a number of other older residents in the state of Illinois, there's just that built up to demand to get back to, some sort of sense of normalcy. And so that I hope that, we're going to see a huge explosion of spending come later on this summer as those individuals get, vaccinated and moving through that program. We're going to see those individuals that the fear is going to start to alleviate some as we start to open up more and more. The one thing I want to see, though, is sensible allowances in terms of people going out and getting back to it. I want to be at a White Sox game enjoying a hot dog and a beer, just like everybody else, but I also want to do it safely. So I do hope that as we get through the summer, we have that big pent up demand really get out there into through summer into fall, that we don't overdo it. And we're right back where we're at next winter, and that we have to have some sort of set closures or anything like that. I just hope that we can do it correctly.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, hot dog, beer, and the nachos in the helmet are very good at the White Sox part. Dr. Divongi wanted to follow up, so I'll go back to him quickly.
Yeah, first of all, I have to say, Brian, you're spot on. Aurora is one of those areas in the state that's doing relatively well compared to other areas. But also, when we talk about the stimulus package, everybody should kind of know that even before this new proposal by President Biden, state and local governments' revenue losses have already been more than offset. They were already higher than they were pre-pandemic. So that's something to know. It may not be getting down to the people who need it the most, and that's my biggest concern.
Excellent, thank you. So the last question we'll cover, there's been some dialogue in the chat about assistance programs to help businesses grow. So we know the new rules about the PPP will help target very small businesses, kind of the self-employed. Are there any special programs, any assistance programs out there that can help businesses that are hurting now? Dr. Divongi, Brian, Dr. Lewis, anyone?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So Dr. Scott. So, just last week, the city of Aurora launched their most recent assistance program for small businesses. These are targeted, in really kind of a three-prong attack here. One is the rebate of sale, food and beverage tax, back to those businesses producing those. This is a program run directly out of the city of Aurora to work with those and make this process as simple as possible. There's a second where the city is waiving liquor licenses, for the coming 12 months as part of that program. And then the third is actually a grant program called SURF. It's the Coronavirus Economic Relief Fund, and they're actually the city is doing a second round here. We had Stable that ran last year starting in May, and we're still wrapping up that program for a lot of individuals, and did up to $25,000. This program, based on qualifications and the need of the businesses, the city is looking to give back up to $15,000 per business, for a total fund of about $1.2 million. So that program is still open. Applications are being received through the end of this week. I believe they are looking to close that on March 1st. So, for all the businesses that are listening here, if you're located in the city of Aurora, please get those applications in. Go to the City of Aurora's website, or you can find it on Invest Aurora under coronavirus resources.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Dr. Lewis, I want to go to you quickly. Someone asked about policy being more equitable and targeting those who might be in the lower bar. You mentioned kind of the K-shaped recovery. What are some ways that you think policy could be better to help those who need a little more help?
Yeah, and actually I saw in the chat someone mentioned that the next round of PPP is going to be more targeted. The previous version defined a small business at such a scale that while it sounded maybe small, it included something like 80% of businesses in the United States. This next version of PPP should be much smaller, much more targeted. I think that's a really good thing. And I think that as a community, we've got to be more conscientious about, again, reaching out to these underserved communities and making sure that they have access to resources, making sure that they feel safe going back to work. I was looking at a study that said that in Chicago, communities of color were right on the margins. Every time reopening happened, they would get pulled back into the labor market, and then infection rates in those communities would go back up. And in the Aurora area, we have a very large Hispanic population, and to whatever extent we have things like access and language barriers preventing mass vaccinations in those communities, we can expect to still see some impediments to recovery there. So I think that at the local level, if we can do some things that are focused in that way, we can help the businesses in that area, and we can help the people in those communities return to work safely.
Excellent. Dr. Dibungi, you have a very unique perspective, being the chief economist at the Illinois Policy Institute. What's one major takeaway that all of our attendees should go with today? If you want them to remember one main thing relative to the economy and policy and all the things we've discussed, what would that be?
So we know who lost their jobs and who had to shut down their operations due to the pandemic. So it should be fairly easy to target them with stimulus dollars. But in order for the state to actually contribute to that effort, we need to reform our broken pension system. We can't take those unrestricted funds from the federal government and spend them on covering up a pension hole and rising pension costs. So I would say, if there's anything we got to take out from this conversation is more needs to be done, and it has to be targeted to low-income families in order to see a more even recovery. And that starts with pension reform at the state level.
Excellent. Thank you very much. How about a round of applause for all of our panelists today? Thought they were outstanding. All right.
Join in on that.
All right. I don't know if I'll be the only one.
And I'm sure there are 50 people doing it that we just can't hear as well. So.
All right, Jessica, back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. And Jamal, excellent job moderating. We really appreciate you being with us for that as well today. So as we wrap up here, we're going to try technology one more time. We do have Brian Dolan, commercial broker with Dolan and Murphy with us, and one of our gold sponsors. I'm going to bring him up here to talk just briefly about Dolan and Murphy and give you a little bit of an update on their company as well. Brian, let's see if technology is on our side this time. Can you hear us on your end?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Oh, I told Jessica this morning that where
I think, Brian, your camera walked away on us. Can you still hear us? There you are.
so sorry about that. I told her this morning I was very technologically challenging. I proved it live, so sorry about that. But I'll start by giving answer now. So do you hear a reverberation when I speak?
Just a little bit, but we can hear you.
So I just wanted to say what a great panel, and it was well done, great topic, great input, and just wanted to kind of introduce our firm a little bit. Dolan and Murphy Real Estate is we actually had our 55th year in Aurora last year, and as you can see from the new logo back in December of last year, we put together a strategic alliance with a great company called Caton Commercial. Their home office is out of Naperville, but we've been talking to the Catons for a few years, so we just combined our talents, and so far so good. It's only been 3 months, but our firm has been in Aurora for, like I say, 55 years. Our father, who just recently passed away last year, started the firm with a partner, Jim Murphy, 55 years ago, and we have had our footprint on a lot of development, a lot of commercial, industrial land. So we're Aurora true and true. In the new affiliation, we're keeping our office in Aurora, and we're looking forward to expanding our outreach. But like forever, our core work is in the Aurora area, and love Aurora people, and just really hoping and praying for a good comeback economically and health-wise for all of the Aurorans and the Aurora businesses. We had some great momentum going into last February with a lot of the things that the mayor had put into place, and then all of a sudden, the pandemic kind of put an end to that temporarily. But I think we're going to come out of this thing roaring again, and a lot of interest in Aurora, a lot of interest in developing in Aurora, and that's kind of our background. And we've always been big proponents and members of the chamber, and I think Jessica's doing a great job, and the panelists were great, great topics, really very interesting information, especially about the trend to the remote job positions and the future like that. But just great to be here on the first chamber event of the year, and we're very pleased to be gold sponsors. So thank you, Jessica, and thank the panelists.
Thank you so much, Brian. We really appreciate you being here, and I think you said it well. Aurora is going to come back roaring strong. So things are looking different, but coming back. Thank you. Well, as we close up here today, everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you for attending today's event. Thank you to all of our speakers. They brought some great strategies for growth and hiring, and really highlighted the need for advocacy as businesses strive forward, which is absolutely a space where we are here to support you. So thank you to all of our speakers, Daniel Culbertson, Dr. Jamal Scott, Brian Gay, Dr. Caleb Lewis, and Dr. Orfe Javungi. Thank you so much for being here and sharing. I'd like to say again, thank you to all of our sponsors. Our gold sponsors, Waubonsee Community College and Dolan and Murphy. Our silver sponsors, eAlliance, Invest Aurora, and ServPro. And our bronze sponsors, Fox Valley Developers and Pilmer Real Estate. I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't say while we were on here, thank you all to our staff for all of their hard work in putting on this event and so many others to bring you information and value. And thank you to our board of directors for being here with us and for their leadership this year and over the many years. We've certainly heard how things are looking different, but there is hope in the future, and there is certainly business happening here in Aurora. We look forward to continuing to be the catalyst for business success and for your success this year and for many more. Thank you for being here with us today, and have a great afternoon, everyone.